my name is Desiree Schumann. I'm with the St. Louis County Library Youth Services Department. Our event today is part of the St. Louis Teen Book Festival, sponsored by the St. Louis County Library, HEC Media, and the Novel Neighbor Bookstore. Hosting over 40 of the hottest young adult writers, the St. Louis Teen Book Fest is 11 days of programming dedicated to connecting teen readers with a diverse group of popular writers. You can order all of our authors' books from our indie bookstore partner, The Novel Neighbor, at thenovelneighbor.com. And they are offering special discounts if you purchase a bundle of all of the featured books on this panel. I'm also very pleased to have Sandra Salib with me today to participate in our discussion. Sandra is a student at the Ladue Horton Watkins High School, and she'll be asking questions in just a moment. Today, we are joined by four fantastic authors in young adult literature: Kim Johnson, Caleb Roehrig, Sara Faring, and Amanda McCrina. This panel hits so many things. We're talking social justice, we're talking war, we're also talking family in almost all of these books as well, family dynamics. Our authors have all written very different types of books, and each one of them has taken our breath away in one fashion or another. So let's get started with Kim. Do you think you could start us off by introducing yourself and then telling us a little bit about This Is My America?
Yes, I'm so excited to be here with you all. So I'm Kim Johnson, author of This Is My America. In my non-writing life, I'm interim vice provost at the University of Oregon. I work with a lot of undergrads, do mentoring work, diversity, social justice work. And my novel is about a 17-year-old Black girl named Tracy Beaumont, whose father has been wrongfully incarcerated and sentenced to death. And for the past 7 years in the story, she's been writing letters to Innocence X, hoping that they'll free her father. And it's giving homage to the Innocence Project and the Equal Justice Initiative. And it's a story that is about family. As you shared earlier, it's about hope. It has a teen main character who takes on activism in all kinds of ways, safe and dangerous ways. So it is a page turner. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Amanda, can you go next?
Yeah, so I'm Amanda McCrina. I work as an indie bookseller outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and my book is called Traitor, and it is a young adult World War II novel set on the Eastern Front, and it follows a young Soviet sniper who has to go on the run after not quite accidentally shooting his unit's political officer. And it's just kind of my homage to the Polish war experience. I have some Polish ancestry, and I wanted to write a novel about Poland during World War II because there's not a lot of those out there, especially in young adults. So it's kind of a dark and difficult book, but it is hopefully, like you said, a look at the way family supported each other during this time, and it hopefully has some applications for today as well.
Wonderful. Caleb.
Hi, yes, I am Caleb Roehrig, and I am the author of The Fell of Dark. I don't actually have a physical copy of my book with me, so I have this printed picture. But anyway, it is a paranormal fantasy thriller about a chaotic disaster gay named Augie Pfeiffer, who lives in a small town in Illinois that has a very big and chronic vampire problem. All Augie wants is to first pass Algebra 1 finally so he can stop retaking the class, 2, get a boyfriend, and 3, graduate so he can move as far away from his undead-ridden hometown as he can. But all of his plans are thrown into disarray with the arrival of an annoyingly hot vampire who comes to town with a dire warning. Apparently, a ancient and evil entity is planning its return to the earthly realm, and it has chosen Augie as its vessel.
Awesome. And now, Sara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sara Faring, author of The 10th Girl and my latest book, White Fox. White Fox opens on a mysterious Mediterranean island where a world-famous film star lives with her pharmaceutical tycoon husband and their 2 daughters. And one night, the film star disappears. and it's rumored she's left behind a final film script that could be the key to finding her. 10 years later, her daughters, who are leading very different lives in Manhattan, return to the island for a retrospective celebrating their mother's work. And once they're there, they discover the film script, launching the most thrilling journey of their lives as they unravel the dangerous secrets behind their mother's disappearance. And I like to view it as an eerie, twisty fairy tale, but with a modern setting. A reader said something I really loved about it. We called it Gothic futurism. So whatever that calls up in your imagination is probably close to on point. That's me. Hi.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. That was great to like hear your own words, what your books are about. The next thing I'm going to do is ask you each a different question, but again, feel free to, if you like the question I give Caleb, you can answer it afterwards, okay? So Kim, I'm going to start with you. This is your debut. So can you name something that you wish you knew before you decided to tackle writing a book?
You know, I think what I wish I knew before I wrote my book, or before I even knew that I was going to be published, was really that, you can't actually control your process, even with say you have a marketing plan and you're ready for it. Things happen. And you have to adapt. And yes, the pandemic was an extreme lesson to learn of being a debut that you can't plan. But I think I've learned from so many other writers that things change. Sometimes another book comes out just before your book, or I have one writer friend who wrote about a dystopian story that has a lot of elements that are very close to the pandemic. She didn't know that was going to happen, and how that feels about her book. And so there's things you can't control. So just write the best book that you can and keep writing. And so that's what I sort of wish that I would have been prepared for in a way, but I don't think anyone could have been prepared for being a debut all year in the pandemic.
Okay, Amanda, for you, I was just wondering what takes the longest, researching, writing, or revising?
Definitely the rough draft for me. I tend to research as I write. It's kind of a simultaneous thing for me, but the rough draft takes forever. I actually much prefer revising to actually writing the first draft. Yeah, I'm a slow writer.
All right, Caleb, name 3 things that you must have in order to sit yourself down and write, no matter what it is you're working on.
Oh my gosh. So 3 things. Okay. So a white noise app. I always work with a white noise app. I used to, when I first started writing, I could write anywhere at any time. I was just the magic of creation was with me, and I would just sit down. I could do it in a crowded restaurant. I could do it in a cafe. I could do it at home. I can't do that anymore. I have a white noise that plays like I listen to rain sounds. Even if it's raining out, I have to have this thing plugged into my ears so that it blocks out everything else. I like to have tea. Like I like to drink green tea when I write, and that doesn't actually do anything, but it's my ritual, and now I feel its absence if I don't have that with me. And quite frankly, the internet, because I research as I go, and I've got to know what I'm doing. If I come across an issue and I'm like, I don't actually know if this is right, especially if I'm writing something that's set in the past, or if I'm writing, quite frankly, writing about contemporary teenagers is a challenge because everything changes so quickly, especially as technology changes. And I'm like, I don't know what kids do now, so I've got to look it up and figure that out.
I think that's a great answer. Sarah, name one of your characters that you would want by your side in an emergency, and why would you want them?
Oh my gosh. That's really hard because I'm thinking back, and I'm thinking about how troubled a lot of my characters are, and I'm like, I don't want to carry them. I don't want to have to carry them. I think it would probably be, this is terrible, but Okay, I'm gonna say in White Fox, my latest book, there are two sisters, and one of them is Manon, who goes by Nani, and we have very similar personality types. So I think we'd get along like a house on fire, which qualifies as an emergency, right? Even though that's not the. She is the kind of person who, would rather be curled up on the sofa reading a book, but also like over analyzing everything and like falling down a deep spiral. But she acts when she has to. So yeah, I'd go with that.
Let's move on. I think it's time for Sandra to ask you guys some questions. She really has thought out some great questions for you each. And so I'll turn it over to Sandra.
Hi, I'm Sandra. I'm going to start by asking a couple of specific questions. First of all, Kim, I love this book. It dealt with so many current issues that are really deep-rooted in our society from just such a different perspective. And for me, the news can get really, really overwhelming with the amount of different stories and skewed perspectives that you get. And just reading your book, it shows all of that, but from one point of view and just one specific family. Even if it's just like a fictional family, it addressed a lot of questions and issues in our current society in a creative and intimate and relatable way. So props to you on that.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So your book deals with a lot of racism, justice, and family, which is very current, and we're dealing with that as a society every day. Were you inspired to write or publish your book because of the events that happened this summer?
Tangentially, so in 2015, when the Black Lives Matter movement was really growing, that was a time period that a lot of my college students that I was working with were involved in a lot of activism. And I was really frustrated with the media because when I was looking at the media, they had turned these very tragic incidents that continue to afflict Black and Brown communities into either stories about a body, not even a human, but sort of these bodies that these things sort of happen to, and this sort of tainted image of their life. So whether that was Eric Garner, who actually was one of the sort of the inspirations as I watched my son, who was 6 at the time, catch that on the news and share, mommy, why aren't they stopping? He says he can't breathe. They should be helping him. What's going on? To looking at Mike Brown or Trayvon Martin, where, young boys just existing, were turned into sort of these villains of like, well, look at how big they are. Look at how you sort of like all of this sort of like loaded language. And that's really what inspired me to write, because I felt like people didn't understand why people were saying Black Lives Matter. So again, this is before this summer, having to try to explain that this isn't just one incident. It isn't like it's one incident that happened to someone, which I kept feeling like that's what sort of media was doing, or not necessarily media. I think people who are consuming media and then getting on media and talking about like it's just one incident. And I wanted to show how systemic these issues were. And so that was really my inspiration to really want to lean into a conversation, focus on a family really deeply. So it wasn't just about the trauma that they were experiencing, but it was a family that was experiencing loss and really trying to hold on to each other and save each other because the system had failed them. But I never imagined that my book would release with all of these themes during the summer, that people now have just really, I think, woken up in a way that isn't just for a second, but like a prolonged thinking about these particular issues, and in many cases acting upon wanting towards change. So that was a really big piece of my inspiration to tell my story.
Amazing, all amazing things. Thank you so much for sharing those stories with us. Amanda, I'm coming to you next. Your book was also so powerful. It was heartbreaking, shocking, and truly a roller coaster read. It deals with a lot of political conflict, deep-rooted prejudice, and the fear of death due to betrayal. So what inspired you to write about this time period specifically?
Well, I mentioned earlier how like I got really interested in this history in high school because I knew my family had Polish heritage, and especially recent fiction, there wasn't a lot about the Eastern Front of World War II in general and Poland specifically. So that was part of it. And I had actually in high school written a short story that was kind of the genesis of this idea. It was for a history class assignment actually, and I wrote a short story about a Soviet sniper who's dealing with some of these ethnic conflicts and the prejudice and the fear in this part of the world at this time between different ethnic groups. Not just, we think of World War II, we think of the Holocaust, and we think of obviously the Nazis, but I mean, there were so many different groups in this part of the world at this time. You had, Poland, you had a Ukrainian nationalist movement that was fighting the Soviet Union. You had the Soviets, you had, multiple just different splinters of all these ethnic and nationalistic groups that were fighting over this territory. And we don't learn about that, I feel like, in the United States. The Eastern Front is just kind of this obscure, kind of unknown thing to us. And I wanted to bring some more awareness just to the complexity of this part of the war through the lens of the Polish experience specifically.
That's really cool. Thank you so much, Amanda. Sarah, your book was honestly lyrically written. It really drew me into the story with the alternating perspectives between the two sisters and their journey in developing their mother's legacy. It was such a unique story. What inspired you to write it?
Thank you so much. I'm honored. What inspired me? So when I was 17, I learned a family secret that had been, hidden my whole life. And it completely upended my understanding of who my parents were and even who I was, and sent me into this tailspin of a moment. And it was really raw, but also very thrilling because I felt like I was making progress towards figuring out who I was really. And I wanted to capture that in a book. So in a tighter, let's say the whole book, I think mostly occurs in a week span. So I wanted my sisters to have a series of epiphanies about their family and show how that kind of ripples through their understanding of themselves and their parents, who kind of hover over them almost like gods, which I feel like can be the case for a lot of us growing up. We have larger than life figures that we believe are infallible and near perfect, even if they do, heaven forbid, but often they do harm us or make mistakes, because after all, they're only human. So that was definitely a big inspiration for the book. And beyond that, I would say that it's a mixed media book, which means that there are little snippets of the actual film script that you get to read and snippets of articles. And what inspired that was as a reader and as a writer, but especially as a reader growing up, I loved feeling that like I was part of the mystery and that I was unraveling it myself bit by bit. It feels really interactive and really fun, and kind of makes me think about certain things, certain little nooks and crannies that I haven't thought about for a long time in my own life, in my own personal relationships. So that was definitely another big inspiration. Other books and pieces of media that mix and aren't necessarily one straightforward narrative. So yeah, I feel like that's the tip of the iceberg, but I'm gonna cut myself off. Thank you for the really nice question.
All right, thank you so much for your answers. I'm gonna move on to Caleb. Caleb, The Fell of Dark is an interesting twist on the usual vampire romance stories, I'd say, with a lot of irony, action, and so much more. And I thought this book, while being a classic vampire story, also takes you by surprise with every page turn. I know you used to be a TV show producer. What made you decide to become an author as well?
I started when I knew that I wanted to write books when I was too young to actually write. When I was like 3-4 years old, I would sit in my mom's lap and I would dictate stories to her and she would write them down. And then I would illustrate them and we would staple them together and make like little books. They were all terrible, very derivative. It was, I had an obsession with witches. I don't know why. There was always like a scary witch who would like jump out of a cupboard or something. And zap whoever the narrator was. But so I always wanted to be a writer. That was always something that was that I was really interested in. When I was maybe, I think 4th grade, we had to do a thing about, like, what are we going to be when we grow up? And I said, I'm either going to be an actor, an artist, or an author. And I never really progressed past stick figures, but I did do the acting thing and I did do the author thing. And I really sort of started my career as an actor, and then I segued into working in television. And then basically the whole time I still was interested in writing. I took a short story writing class in high school that I think is really what ignited my, like, a serious passion for it. Because prior to that, it was just sort of a hobby. It was just this thing that I kind of enjoyed doing, telling stories. And then I took this class where I sort of really learned how to structure a plot, and I learned how to think about characters and characterization and motivation and all this other stuff. And sort of, I learned by doing. So actually sitting down and kind of creating my own stories is how I learned how to tell stories and how I learned how to fall in love with telling stories. So I never really wanted to give it up, but I never had, I never had any, formal training. Who does? But I never had any kind of formal training in it. So I just kept sort of doing it behind the scenes while I was working on other things. And then I lost my job and I had nothing to do except for sit around and write. And so that is how I wrote my debut. Was I just had nothing to do. I made it my full-time job. I said, all right, I'm sick of sitting here spinning my wheels, so I'm going to try to do something productive. And I went back to this thing that I'd always loved doing, and it paid off.
Yeah.
And thank goodness too, because I wouldn't know how to produce a television show now.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are dealing that with COVID and losing their jobs, but good for you for like finding a different way to use your time and be productive with it. Thank you so much for answering. I just have a couple of general questions for all of you guys. It's kind of like advice for people who are just starting to write their books, I guess. So if you had to do something differently as a child or teenager to become a better writer as an adult, what would you do?
I started writing at 32, and I never had any level of strong confidence, even though I've gone to college, I've gone to graduate school. I didn't see myself on the page. And so I didn't believe that I could be on the page. And when I was writing, I felt that if I needed to have something, the process of a revision when I was younger felt like failure. It felt like I was going to show my inadequacies to a teacher, and a teacher's going to say, yeah, this Black girl, she just can't really write because she just, her people. And that was how I perceived it in the world. And that's because, growing up, I was one of the only always in my class, almost all the way up through high school. And so I think if I was to redo it, I would have found my space of what storytelling. I think what Caleb was talking about is all about storytelling. As I found out that later in life, I've always been a storyteller. I just never knew that I could be a writer. And if I would have started that earlier and had the confidence, I think, in myself, or mentorship, I blame them. They should have really helped me. It's not actually my fault, it's society's fault. But if I want to take power within myself, I would say that I would have not have had that be something that took 30 years of my life to figure out. But I also recognize that I'm not stuck on having to write things a certain way because I don't have that grounding. I don't have that. I break genre elements because I don't know any better, right? And so to me, that actually is really freeing. So
Something that I think I would have appreciated, maybe not knowing, but focusing on and having as a goal. I was a big reader when I was really young, and it was definitely a form of escapism because I was a really shy kid who didn't have a lot of friends. And I would also often write stories, but I would start them and lose enthusiasm pretty fast. And I was such a perfectionist and so hard on myself that I would, as soon as my enthusiasm waned, I would sort of dump them and maybe forget about it, maybe move on to the next story and do the same thing over and over. But I think something really powerful happens when you finish a draft, when it's complete. And it can be, I mean, I don't want to use the word trash because really it's not. I mean, it exists, it's there, but it can be, I call it a zero draft because I still have that level of like perfectionism that I can't quite, but to complete it and then be able to look at it and be proud of yourself for having this arc, even if it's imperfect, and know that you can fix it and improve it. I think it would have given me a little boost in confidence and made me feel like I could be a writer. But yeah, just to not give up if you've started something, even if you lose the enthusiasm, just try to finish because you'll have that extra burst of like confidence and pride.
I'm actually gonna jump on that because that I agree 100%. That's my story too, that I used to, I would start writing these things and then abandon them when I would kind of, as soon as they got hard, as soon as it got difficult to figure out what comes next, I would sort of just say, well, okay, then nothing comes next. What comes next is a new project. But what ended up happening for me was I took that short story writing class, and after it ended, I wanted to keep writing. And I had a friend in college give me, I would say to her, just give me a prompt, anything. And I'll write a 3-page short story, just like 3 pages, it'll be easy. And I remember she was like, write a horror story. So I did. And when I handed it to her, I said, you know what? I think there's more to this. I want to write more about these characters because I finally found something that really resonated with me. It was the plot that I liked. It was characters that I liked. It was atmosphere. So I started writing and I had no idea what I was doing, but it got longer and longer and longer and longer. And finally I finished it. And there was no turning back. There was no turning back after that. It was trash. It was really bad. But it was 160,000 words, which is really long, but it was a story and it was a full story and I'd done it and I proved to myself I could. So yeah, for me, like I said, for me, I always learn by doing. And by completing a novel, I showed myself I could do it and I could do it again. So I just refined the process.
Yeah, great advice. I definitely feel that way sometimes where it's just like, if it's not perfect, I'm going to throw it away and start over. But Sarah, I'm going to have to disagree with you there. You have not read one of my English research papers. Those are most definitely trash. Thank you all so much. This was such a great interview. Desiree, would you like to say something?
I have character questions, but I know we're probably getting close on time, but I definitely want to make a couple of comments about characters. First of all, Kim, Beverly. I feel like Beverly has her own story. Will she?
It's funny. I never thought of any sort of spin-offs or prequels or what's next, but the more I talk to people and how they connect with different characters, it does make, I'm not promising. No, I have no idea, but I think that there's possibilities for these stories to go on. So
Yeah. So, and then Amanda Solovey, he's kind of a wild card. And I didn't know how I thought about him until the end when I was like, so I just want to say that I really enjoyed his journey, I think is what I'm trying to say. So, do you have, was there an inspiration for him specifically?
I don't know if I can point to a specific inspiration, but I will say his voice came to me. I didn't even really have to revise his section of the narrative that much. He just, came out fully formed and just had such a voice. And yeah, I really didn't have to do much to revise his part of the story. And I will also say that my next book, which comes out next February, if you liked his character, you might like the next book as well. So
Okay.
there's a little teaser for you.
Fantastic. That was actually going to be my next question after all this, but you got ahead of me. Caleb, Mr. Strauss and Daphne, come on now. But I gotta say, seriously, in all seriousness, I love Augie so much. So tell me, how much of Augie is Caleb and how much of Caleb is Augie?
Oh, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of me in there. That's something that Sarah said earlier is also very true for me, that there's a piece of me in all of these characters. I think that in a lot of ways, Augie comes the closest to who I am, and certainly who I was as a teenager. As I was a disaster. I could not get it together to save my life or the planet. But there was so much passion inside of me. Like I had so much love for art, and I had so much, I don't know, I think about Augie as kind of this giant ball of emotions that he is just trying to figure out how to contain and synthesize and express. And in a lot of ways, that was my journey. Like as a teenager, was trying to figure out how to feel all these things and not let it completely overwhelm me. I just wanted to have that guy. I wanted to have this person who kind of, he's a goofball, and he's kind of very, like, he wears his heart on his sleeve, and he always has sort of a joke to make about everything, even if he's kind of sad, and even if he's kind of a mess. That's where he retreats to. The humor is his shield, and it's also sort of how it's his love language. So I just really wanted to have a character who was just fun. I'd written books of all these like wounded people who were trying to solve murders and save their family history and whatever. And I just wanted to write a book about this kid who's the absolute worst possible person to have to save the world from the vampire apocalypse, and just put him right in the center of it and let him just be this, I don't know, this goofball, this kind of like soft-hearted goofball. So.
And he does save the world, so it's awesome. Sarah, the mother in your story is really kind of larger than life, and you don't really, the only perspective we see is from other people. So how did you kind of build this character that really was larger than life but couldn't speak for themselves?
I love this question because it actually was something I was really interested in doing, was sketching a person who you only really got to know through other people's points of view and other people's flawed perspectives on them. And what I loved most was it's essentially her two daughters who only know her when they're children. At least, you'll have to see what happens in the book, and they have to essentially sort through fans and old colleagues and, their father and all of these different points of view that are very flawed. And a lot of these people had toxic relationships with their mother, to kind of figure out what their actual sort of story about her and her life and her disappearance is, sort of the narrative that works for them in their lives. I found that really interesting, especially in this moment we're in right now, where sometimes it feels like looking at people from the outside and only having the media's perspective and, the Twitterverse's perspective, it almost feels like people are faceted in this strange way where like you look from a certain angle and you see certain things, and even like, let's say the Meghan Markle and Harry interview, like it's interesting how kind of faceted that is online in a way that, doesn't feel true to the people in a lot of senses. And people are bringing so much of themselves to their view of this larger than life person. So that is a very rambly way to answer your wonderful question. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This has been so fun to sit and talk to you guys, and I really hope we get to see you next year in person. To conclude, I just want to make sure that I thank HEC Media and Novel Neighbor, and remind everyone that they can order books through thenovelneighbor.com. And there's lots more Teen Fest events available to watch, either on the library's Facebook or YouTube page. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Desiree and Sandra.